advent of CSS3, we got the ability to have more than just what we had talked about in the previous lesson, where we have these nested selectors. We've got the ability actually to do different combinations. So this is essentially the same thing nested, and it's the same thing as doing a descendant selector. So the H2 is a descendant of lesson, and we're just going to apply background color, this pink background color, to all of them. Going back out to our HTML, we see that we have this pink color that gets applied to every single H2 that is contained within a class, an element with the class of lesson. So going down to the code, we see that we've got this div class lesson. Here we've got one H2, here we've got another H2, and again class lesson H2 and lesson H2. And this is why this pink is being applied to all of them. I can actually pull that out there, and so we won't be able to see that, and go back out here and refresh it, and we see that we still get the value being applied to those H2s that we had set previously. So we've got that background color, we've got the padding, and the padding actually propagates through. So even though we're resetting some additional values, properties and values to the H2, we're still holding on to this padding of 5 pixels, and if we're not actually resetting it, then we're just still holding on to those values. So that's what we talk about when we talk about descendant. We also have a child selector. So a child selector, although oftentimes it looks very similar to what we do with the descendant or the nested value when we're doing a selector. So now we've got the lesson class, and if it's got an H2, so if it's got a child that's an H2, it's going to get this value applied to it. And this only is in effect for children that are immediately under this one. So when we go back out here, and we're going to take a look at lesson number 1 here, and we refresh it, we see that we actually are losing the value on the first H2 tag that we had within that particular lesson. And when we look at the code here, so this is the code here, that we've got this div, it's got a class of lesson, and we've got one H2 and another H2. And the difference is that this H2 is actually nested in another div. So we're not able to select it as an immediate child of lesson anymore, because now it's actually nested within another div, and this div doesn't have a class of lesson. So if we actually switch this around and gave this div a class of lesson, we would only get it for the first one, and we wouldn't get it for any additional divs that had an H2. So again, it's another one of those things where you have to be really careful when you are picking out that you're able to select your proper elements that you do want to apply that style to, and then this always comes back down to your HTML structure to make sure that you've structured it well enough in order to accommodate and use these particular CSS selectors. And sometimes you might be using it this way, and sometimes you might have to come up with another solution and another way to really isolate out that HTML code that you want to apply styling to. We also have what's called an adjacent sibling selector. So what this is going to do is this is going to select all elements that are adjacent siblings of the descendant element. So see what happens here when I apply it to lesson and I refresh it, and we can see that we're only getting it applied to that one particular H2. And so this H2, again, this is falling into where we've got a div here, and right next to this particular div, the sibling to this div is going to be this H2. And that's why this is the only one that's actually getting that property attached to it, because it is the adjacent sibling to this particular selector. And again, regardless of if they're divs, if they're H2s, it's irrelevant because we're actually only picking up this particular item that's being selected. So again, you have to be really mindful when you're thinking about selecting out different values. We also have a general sibling selector. So this one was only for particular adjacent ones. So this is going to be a general sibling selector, and we'll refresh it and see what happens. So we actually immediately don't see any difference. And maybe we got to add in some more H2s. So I'll add in a bunch of other ones, another H2, and I'm just going to do, maybe I can do it this way, 1, 2, 3, and then this is 0. And we see that it actually gets applied to all of them. But when we go back here, we change this back to the adjacent one, and we go out and we refresh it. We see that it's only applied to that first one, because again, it's not applying to all the general ones, it's only applying to that adjacent one. So it takes a little bit of practice to go over this, but it really does help you pick out and better select out that particular element that you're looking to find and apply styling to.